Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for coming today for this Lemons Legacies Porch Talk. My name is Sarah Thomas. I'm the Associate Director of the Lemon Project. I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Juwan Johnson. He's going to read some statements before we officially begin.
Good afternoon, everyone. The statement on slavery and its legacies. The Board of Visitors acknowledges that William and Mary enslaved people, exploited them and their labor, and perpetuated the legacies of racial discrimination. The board profoundly regrets these activities, apologizes for them, expresses its deep appreciation for the contributions made by the African American and African American members of its community to the vitality of William and Mary then, now, and for all time coming, and commits to continue our efforts to remedy the lingering effects of past injustices. The land acknowledgement. William and Mary acknowledges the indigenous peoples who are the original inhabitants of the lands our campus is on today. The Cherokee's, Chickahominy, Eastern Chickahominy, Mattaponi, Monacan, Nansemond, Nottoway, Pamunkey, Potomac, Upper Mattaponi, and Rappahannock tribes, and pay our respect to their tribal members, past and present.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. So we're going to get into reflecting and planting seeds conversation with Ariel Newby. Thank you, Ariel, so much for being here today with us. I'm going to ask some questions. We're going to have a conversation, and also feel free to put questions or comments in the chat, and we'll see if we can get to those as well. So Ariel, I could read your biography and it'd be super impressive, but I want to ask you to tell us a little bit about yourself. You talk about where you grew up, talk about your collegiate experience, whatever you think is relevant for us to know today.
Well, thank you so much
for being here.
I'm so excited to be here, and thank you so much for having me. And just to the Lemon Project, just could not be more honored to be in this position with you all today. So a little bit about me. I am originally from Surrey, Virginia, which is not far, right across the river. Take the ferry over and you get to this beautiful, gorgeous rural town. And that is where I was born. I was raised in Alpharetta, well, part down Johns Creek, Georgia. I was raised by my mother in a single parent household. My mother is amazing and just everything to me. I have very supportive grandparents who are just like my second set of parents. And we had a very sort of, in my viewpoint, a very social justice oriented family. My grandmother broke barriers, and she is in the room today. And so I'm saying, hey, Mama Joe. She literally broke barriers for our family. She's literally one of the first in our family to go to college, and not only go to college, but get a doctoral degree. And she has worked in the K-12 school system for over 30 years and ended her tenure there as an assistant superintendent for Surrey County. My grandfather was a business owner in HVAC and HVAC, plumbing, heating, all those things. He was one of the earliest members of the NAACP over in Surrey County and just did a lot of work there. He marched on Washington. And so it's just very within my family. And then my mother, while she did not finish her education, ended up, going into corporate America very quickly and showing her resilience, because she was one of those who lost so much during the 90s through corporate America with everything that was going on there. And so just very blessed to have that kind of upbringing, and that is just centered on our religion and Christianity. We are Baptist, and then just, doing everything we can to support our communities. And I just thank, my family for laying that foundation early for me, because it speaks to a lot of what I do today. As far as my collegiate experience, I could not get away from Virginia, so I came back from Georgia, went to Hampton University. Those who know me know that I am a proud pirate. I will say it to any and everybody. So you know my excitement when I found out that we're moving into the same division as William and Mary. So do not be surprised. I am going to wear my Hampton paraphernalia as much as I work for William and Mary. That's just where it is. It should not be any surprise to anyone. So, and many of you may know, Hampton University is a historically Black college and university. So I definitely had an opportunity to be at an institution where I just felt completely secure in who I was. While I had the opportunity to grow up in Alpharetta, Georgia, which is very affluent, it was still very white, and it's still racist in a sense, and I'm sure they wouldn't like being said that they are, but it is what it is. It's still Georgia, still those areas, and just because you have wealth does not always equate to having privilege and being accepted for who you are. And I can think of some very chilling moments that have happened during my time in Alpharetta, but I will say I had a great education, but I just could not wait to go to an HBCU where I had the opportunity to be surrounded by so much Black excellence, and not just within the United States. I am talking about different countries as well, being around people with different socioeconomic statuses, orientation, just across the board diverse. But also having the opportunity to see from your president to your provost to your faculty, your staff, just other Black people who were just excellent in their own right, and navigating the space of higher education where it is, the curriculum is very centered on social justice, right? And I was a political science major, and so a lot of the work that we were doing was talking about how we break barriers and how we challenge the status quo. And so that was just a great place for me. I did spend a significant amount of my time being RA. For part of my time there, I was also working my way through college. We had some family difficulties, and so I had to basically emancipate myself in order to get more financial aid. But again, just grateful to have had a family that was able, to support me. My grandmother did so much during that time, and just could not be more grateful. I went into college thinking that I was going to be a lawyer. So when we talk about why did I end up at William and Mary, originally it was because I left my job working at the SPA to study for the LSAT and took a temporary position in the career services office at the law school. One of my coworkers at the SPA, her mom is a lawyer, and happened to be working in career services and told me about this temporary position. I thought it would be great as I, figure out what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. And ironically, now sort of like looking back at it, I'm like, oh, if that wasn't God helping me to like navigate what comes next, because I didn't know what it meant. And I knew I wanted to be a lawyer. I knew I wanted to advocate, but I didn't know all the things I wanted to do. And so I was blessed to join such a dynamic team who was just motivated in helping me figure it out too, and realizing too, I was a mom when I entered that space, that I really valued my nights and weekends. And so law school was not going to be where I needed it to be at that time. And so I decided to just go ahead and stay. I applied for the position when it, became full time, and was able to stay and learn more about the legal community, connect with students who were in my age group at that time. And so, I live vicariously through a lot of them and their experiences, and they let me know sort of the ins and outs and what that would be like. And so still decided that just wasn't for me at the time. And so realizing I loved higher ed, I stayed here at William and Mary and got the opportunity to then move into the provost office, where I was an assistant, getting a bird's eye view of the lay of the land for higher education. And here at William and Mary, and my former supervisor in career services, along with my current coworker at the time, they were like, you need to go get your master's. And so I moved into that space, and my coworker was like, just take one class. You never know how it goes. Just go do it. Miss Celestine, for those who know her, just a godsend. And before you know it, I'm literally finishing my master's in 2021. And it's amazing how things have just moved in the course of that time. And I will say that was a very stressful point too, right? While getting my master's, I'm being a parent, the pandemic happens. I'm literally in a place where I joined the staff assembly and within the first 2 years somehow become president. I don't know how. They trust me, but we went for it. And then, while being president, of course, like I said, the pandemic is happening and I become the staff liaison to the Board of Visitors. And I'm in all of these different meetings talking about how are we gonna like sail this ship, trying to bring the staff perspective and trying to, support leadership in decision making and thinking about how we go from point A to point B. There was no manuscript. And so it was basically a lot of trial and error. But it was also a really great time to sort of look back on because I never really had an opportunity to do some of the things that I wanted to do and be able to have the perspective I wanted to have as a leader. And so I was like, go for it. So just really grateful to have had the opportunity to serve in those capacities with the Board of Visitors, with President Rowe, Provost Segoras, our COO, Amy Sebring, and just being able to have those dynamic conversations about what comes next. So that's kind of a broad scope of what happened over literally the last 8 years of my life at William & Mary, but and then also before, but that's me in a nutshell.
So that's a lot of great information. Thank you for sharing so much, Ariel. It's we're still in the pandemic, that we've all had a lot of different experiences in these last few years. I mean, you were working full time as a single mother while getting a master's, graduating with this master's, while you were in these meetings that you talk about with the president, the COO, with the provost, and you were in a volunteer role, and you were probably, getting paid a lot less than everyone else in that meeting, but you were put in this circumstance. Can you talk about what that was like? And you did so much in these past few years, and can you talk what it was like to be in those meetings and be in that volunteer leadership position that was really, really important to William & Mary's success during the pandemic early years?
Well, at first it was nerve-wracking. I mean, you come from a place where you have different ideas about how things could go, but you don't have any type of power or authority, let alone the privilege. And so it's very nerve-wracking. I felt like sometimes, how was I going to be perceived? Was this going to affect my job? Was this potentially going to affect future jobs that I had interest in doing? But I think what it came back to for me is I was put there for a reason. While yes, it was a volunteer position, I was elected to be president. I was elected to serve the staff on this campus. At the same time, I recognized that with some of the work that I had an opportunity to do with the provost office, there were just moments of how can we use this to our advantage during the pandemic to kind of do things differently, because there is no manuscript for this, right? There is no status quo. And I'm one of those who, while nervous to challenge the status quo, I want to challenge the status quo. And I think I also had an opportunity to utilize some of that from the work that I was doing within my master's program, and just love to thank the faculty for supporting me through that. I wrote a lot about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I wrote a lot about student success. I wrote a lot about how we support Black students in our Black communities. And so I felt like this was a time to bring some of that theory to practice. And if that's what I believe in, that's what I should be doing. And so that helped motivate me to say some things I may not have said ordinarily. Motivated me to say, no, I don't think that's the right course of action. And here are my thoughts. And you need those moments. You need to be able to pull from all parts of your life, whether it be your home life, whether it be you in an organization, whether it be you as a student, to inform your own decision making. Really, it was very nerve-wracking, but it had to be done. We got to a point where we were having conversations about, how do we do personnel actions if the budget falls below a certain number. What does that look like? And so I worked with the faculty assembly. I worked with the professional staff assembly, professional faculty assembly, along with staff assembly, to think about how we help leadership message a very complicated and scary message, to be quite honest, because at that time we didn't know what was going to happen. And one of the first things I said is we just have to keep it real, but we have to have a plan. So if we can create some sort of chart to say, like, even for us internally, if X happens, this is how we go about it. And I think we all agreed, obviously, at that time, we wanted to make sure that personnel actions started from the top down, because we realized those who were, making less than $50,000 a year were going to suffer the most, especially when we're thinking about facilities management, who have a lot of marginalized people, Black people, low socioeconomic status, those who are working 2 and 3 jobs just to make ends meet, and many who are living below living wages. And so we can't just sit there and say, we just kind of cut. Like, I think we have to be methodical about that. And so that email was able to come out. And I think that gave the campus a little sense of relief about what this would look like. But we did get so much feedback to say, thank you, we're glad to know this is the plan. And, we all also received feedback saying that that was, among probably one of the best communicated messages we had seen in a while, because, typically when we're sending emails about things that are going on, they sometimes can be really long. Sometimes they can speak over people's heads. I mean, we have different people with different varying educational backgrounds. And so we have to speak a common language. So I was just really great to be in that room where we could say, we feel good about this message. We feel at least good that it's going to go out and it helps people. Now, do we necessarily like the content? Not really. But, it was a great moment of collaboration. And so, essentially nerve-wracking, but the job has to get done. And so I encourage people to, when you go into leadership, don't try to think that it's going to be perfect. Don't try to think that you're going to be able just to move mountains right away. Think about your own individual strengths and bringing that to the table.
So with the Lemon Project, we study the history of African-American experiences at the university from 1693 to present. And, William Mary has this long history of slave owning, Jim Crow, pro-slavery ideology. We still have a long way to go, and we're on that journey. But you went from a HBCU to not just a PWI, but an historically white institution. And so what makes you, keep coming back to work every day? And, you put so much passion and you do so much in your work. What makes you keep coming back to William Mary?
Well, first and foremost, it's my son who keeps me coming back here. He has to be taken care of. But also, like, I want to be his rock and a good role model. I know while we're at this point of challenging, the strong Black woman stereotypes, but knowing that I'm raising a Black son, I always feel like I don't always have an opportunity to challenge that. And I want him to see a strong mother. The other side of that is he deserves the world. And I'm a believer that my ancestors and my elders have paid more than their fair share of the price of what it took for him to be here and for me to be here. So I'm not necessarily just going to allow their struggles to become his, if that makes any sense. So throughout my journey, I've just learned to try to become more and more unapologetic about who I am, and about what I'm here to do. And I will say doing that at William & Mary is a task. There's so much that we pride ourselves on in terms of what is tradition. We're quick to say 1693 and not always think about what that means for people on the other end. However, because of that, I think that's where we're obligated to do the most work. When you look at organizations and companies that sort of pride themselves on this American tradition, it doesn't get more American than William and Mary, right? You're talking about an organization, an institution that was built prior to the country being a country. So in many ways, it's our obligation to do this work, to make sure that we are breaking these barriers, even within our own systems, and continuing to challenge that status quo. So yes, first and foremost, my son and taking care of him. And then two, if I'm saying I want him to have a better world, and that also means for me to do the work in the spaces that I live in.
So with that in mind, what recommendations do you have? I mean, this is a huge question. What recommendations do you have related to diversity, equity, and inclusion at William & Mary, based on your work and your work in the master's program and your experiences?
I think first and foremost, we can't get complacent about the wins that we're celebrating. Yes, there is a time to celebrate them. And at the same time, there's a time to say that's not enough. If we're talking about within the last 50 and 60 years, we are just now starting to get in this place of celebrating the moments of where we were being more inclusive, then we're honestly too late. Not to say that we still can't do work, but I mean, it's also at a point where we need to recognize we moved that ball too slow. And I want to sort of also bring up the hearth, because I'm really excited about this space being built on campus. And I also want to make sure that it's used as a place of reverence, and being remembered, and not necessarily, okay, we got this hearth up, like checkbox. It really has to live and become a real tradition within the university to use that space. I also encourage any of our marginalized groups, such as like even the Black Faculty and Staff Forum, which I'm helping to revitalize currently, the Black Student Organization, our historically Black fraternities and sororities. I encourage them to use those spaces as a part of their rite of passage, because it just seems so significant. And I think we need to be making sure that that space is not just commercialized, like it's actually being used to foster curiosity about the history of our campus, and think about individually how we can contribute to creating this better world and society, right? If we say we want to be anti-racist, what does that mean individually? And that's a good place to start having those conversations, because we don't acknowledge enough of the labor that built this campus. We sit here and say William & Mary is beautiful. We say it's historical, but we don't always attribute that to the nameless and faceless people, humans that gave their life, blood, everything to build this campus. And so in those traditions, recognizing where we can remove the traditions that no longer have a space, and bringing in new traditions that will continue to perpetuate, if we say we believe our mission, vision, and values, perpetuate those mission, vision, and values.
So there was a lot of actions and in 2020 surrounding the murder of George Floyd. And it almost feels like, I don't know if you agree with this. So do you think that there's a sense of complacency has maybe developed around DEI work, and that people said, okay, check, I did that. I'm done. I did that training, or I went to that workshop, or I went to that program. Do you also sense this complacency, and do you have any ideas about how we might overcome it as a university?
I think there is definitely a sense of complacency, and I think you can see where as soon as something happens, it's like hire a CDO, which is a teacher diversity officer, right? Or how can we now have this conversation about racism? And the conversations, I'm not saying they're not great, they definitely are, but how do you move it beyond that? Because we all know there's the meeting after the meeting, right? So like we have these big forums about the discussions that are surrounding race and race relations or LGBTQIA, and where's the discussion about how we create an actual agenda and a promise, and within our own offices and within our own spaces, how we're going to make sure we use the privileges we have in our own spaces to create access. I don't think we put enough emphasis on access and belonging when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, because I fundamentally believe to achieve those, you have to think about those two components together, right? And so I do think that we have gotten way too complacent to the point that it's like we are checking the box and not enough of how we're doing the internal soul searching to move us forward. I feel like if you're not talking about this on a regular basis in your offices or in your home or even strategic planning about how that fits in, and really it should not even fit in, it should be the center of your strategic plans, then you're doing a disservice of, and not allowing yourself the real possibilities to achieve that inclusion, whether it be in your workspace or an organization, and definitely here at William & Mary. So I know there's a lot of people here from William & Mary, so I'm going to say, as you're thinking about Vision 2026, if you haven't had the very distinct conversations in your space about how that comes to fruition for you and for the people that you serve, whether it be students, faculty, staff, or the outside community, then now is the time.
So we have a question in the chat that goes pretty well with what we're talking about right now. How satisfied have you been with the progress and change you've been able to make, challenging the status quo in the various roles you've had here?
I will say it definitely has had its ups and downs. One up I will talk about were the water coolers. I don't like to say that I like created them, because I want to give staff assembly that ability to say that it belongs to that group. But yes, it was something I created. So it was a great moment during a time where we could actually talk to staff and have real conversations about how are you doing, how are you feeling, what communications are getting to you. It also gave us an opportunity to identify and allow staff a safe space to talk about what the challenges are, and not necessarily just at work. We lost a lot of our ability to have these community gatherings because of the pandemic, and we knew that the water coolers had to exist. And so the name itself is what that was seeking to do, right? You know, you want to have a conversation or the meeting after the meeting, you meet at the water cooler, right? That was the idea. And so we just needed to have more of those after meeting conversations in real time, to where we could actually talk to leadership about the ongoing challenges that staff are facing, right? We also knew that a lot of staff don't always feel empowered to talk about the challenges that they're having. And so we just continue to use that as a space to motivate that. And without it, I don't think we would have nearly been as successful with how we navigated through this pandemic. And also it was great to, I mean, most people may not have heard it, but to see the feedback that we were getting from these water coolers, because we took some actual data from it too, and to see that in the president's communications was absolutely phenomenal, because I think it was, you know, a great way to elevate those voices to other voices who may not have been speaking in those spaces. The other side of it is, and this was my biggest lesson in leadership, sometimes you just have to let things go, which is hard, right? Especially when you're putting all of your power, strength, everything you got into an idea that you know can work. And sometimes you just have to let it go. And I will say during this time, a very amazing colleague recommended that I go through leadership coaching. She knew a colleague who was going through her certification and had to do some pro bono hours to get that certification. So I did it. And that's where I manifested. It's time to let go of some things, because the things I was talking to her about is that I felt I had to be everything to everybody. I had to have answers. I had to uplift my community, because I'm a Black woman and because there's very few people who look like me in this space helping to make decisions. Like, I have this whole weight on me and I have to carry it. And coming out of those conversations, I was like, that wasn't the best thing to do. And some things I just had to let go. One, I had to let go for my own soul because I was stressed out. Two, it was above my pay grade, simply. And I wasn't being paid to do a lot of the work in that space. But also at the same time, you just have to pick and choose your battles. And learning that lesson during that time has served me well, where I'm able to let go of things a lot more. And it's still hard, don't get me wrong, because when you feel passionate about DEI or you feel passionate about how you service students, it can really take over. But at the end of the day, you still have to be you, and you only have one body, you only have one life to live. And so you have to use that time wisely. And yeah, those are sort of my ups and downs. And I will say, of course, as anyone, I'm going to keep it real. There are things that I'm proud that we've done as an institution, and there are things that I'm not proud of. But, again, there are some things that are just above you.
One thing that we've been talking about is how great it is to have supervisors who think about you as humans, as people. Can you talk about how your experience with having supervisors that think of you as a person, and how that can be, really, really life-changing, and how on the opposite end, it can be pretty bad if people don't see you as a human being?
Right. So I want to take an opportunity just to shout out my current supervisor, Laura Shepard, our Associate Dean and Chief Equity Officer here at the law school. An amazingly fantastic, phenomenal human being. She gives me so much strength, and I don't even know if she knows it. The way she's been able to help me transition into this position has allowed me to breathe in a place that I wasn't sure I was going to be able to breathe in. You start seeing titles, and titles breed responsibility. And so she's just been such a partner in how I maneuver and transition into this position. I'm also grateful that she has taken time to also, and I know she's doing this, protecting me from things as well, because she realizes I'm here to support her in a place that she was doing this role by herself, and wearing multiple hats. And of course, in return, I'm doing the same for her, because I'm like, you're not going to do what you did last year, because I need your time too. I need your brain power so that we can talk about how we're going to triage and support students, and also do the DEI work here at the law school. So there are times where I'm just like, oh, it's 5 o'clock, go home. Why are you still here? She's like, I'm going to finish one more thing. I'm like, no, you're not. If you do it at home, that's one thing, but you can do it from home. You don't need to be here till 6, 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night. That's not doing any service to you. So I just appreciate her being so, I don't know, just amazing in terms of how she's allowed me to come into this position and grow. And we talk about things that I want to do. We talk about the professional development opportunities. I had an opportunity to send her all the lists of conferences I want to go to, because prior to this position, I wasn't always in a place where I could. One, professional development funds are low at the university, but two, the type of position I was doing didn't always become a priority to do some of that development. So just for her at the beginning of when I first get here, make a list of the things you want to do too. That's amazing. I'm not, and we don't know if we're going to get to everything depending on the time of those conferences and exams and things that are going on here. But at least we had the conversation and talked about it so that we could fit it in, because we knew that that was a priority. And I will say, if you're not in a place where you have a supervisor that you can talk about those things with, then A, reevaluate what is important to you, and B, if you have the motivation and courage to even talk to your supervisor about what is important, then you should, because the only person who can advocate for you is you. No one can be a better advocate. And they don't know what they don't know. Now, at the same time, I'm going to charge leaders to do this too. You have to take the ownership about who works for you, right? You have to lead that conversation and recognizing that the people who are working for you have lives outside of this office. So what can you do to help mitigate some of that stress and come together with collaborating about how you get your work done? There's a million ways to do our work, right? And based on where we are and based on our deadlines, leaders should also have that capacity to be realistic and think about flexible opportunities and how they motivate staff. And so as a leader, you really should be having those conversations up front, whether it's in the interview process, which I could talk a whole dissertation about how we need to do interview processes, but whether it's in the interview process or whether it's one-on-one meetings that you do every other week or once a month or however you decide to do it, but they should be continuous conversations and they should be free-flowing. And so I'll sort of leave it at that, but just having that has taken so much of the stress off of me. And I could not be more grateful. So thank you, Laura. You're awesome.
One thing that we had a lot of during the pandemic eventually was flexibility. You know, flexibility to work from home, flexibility to, the trust that we could do our job and do it well wherever we were. And it seems like even though a lot of the administration has said, you know, we're still flexible, seems like we're losing some of that flexibility. Do you see that happening here at William & Mary? And do you have any ideas about how we can get back to like the progress that we made during the unprecedented times?
Yeah, I definitely do see a lot of those shifts here at William & Mary, just whether it's in conversations, whether it's, you know, my engagement with Black faculty and staff, to the staff assembly and PPFA, and I'm going to say this because it's a very multi-layered question, but I'm going to say this. I think being in higher ed, we recognize there was a lot of wins within that pandemic, and it's still a current pandemic, right? Those of us who are working behind computers, even 50% of our day, saw where we could have some balance, right? I'm going to also recognize that the Great Resignation is real, and it's real for a reason. It's because people are choosing their life over their work. We work to live, not live to work. The other side of that is we're seeing an uptick in higher ed tech companies. There is a reason for that. And a lot of people that I know are taking positions at these higher ed tech companies doing essentially what they're doing in a college or in a office environment, now 100% remote. And in some cases, making more money than you are here and anywhere else for that matter. So I think it's really important that we recognize that the work we're doing and that we ask an employee what makes sense in terms of getting the work done, getting those deadlines, and in a way that's not always stressful to their mental health. And then two, what innovative ideas do they have about the position that they're doing that could help the organization, the institution, or that office be more innovative, to have more efficiencies? I mean, honestly, I don't even want a printer anymore because I didn't need one anymore. Think about how much we save on that, and that could have actually equated to me doing more professional development because we don't have to worry about a printing budget, right? The fact that we can be doing a lot of our processes not in paper, but electronically. And I'm not saying you're just going to stop printing, because some things you probably do have to print. But the reality is, and then the other side of that is we have a goal to be more environmentally sustainable. Did we not just reach that goal? I mean, I don't even know how much paper we cut during the last 2 and 3 years and what that looked like prior. So I think those are definitely pieces we need to think about in terms of how we do that and trying to retain our employees. The other thing is people realize, you know, some people left their families in other states and other countries. And so being able to work in an environment that allows you to spend more time with your family, because we recognized during the pandemic, we didn't have a lot of access to our loved ones. I lost my grandfather during this pandemic. And so that was a moment that I was so glad that instead of staying, even though, you know, he was in Surrey, I didn't stay in Williamsburg for like 8 months. And I stayed with my family, and I was so glad that I had that opportunity to be with him in his last days, because I don't know where I would have been otherwise. And so to be able to see that also gave me a sense of relief too. And I think when you realize that you're bringing people into William & Mary, you need to also talk about the community that they're joining, and that's going to help with retention as well. People will stay where they feel connected, not just for the work, but they will stay where they feel connected.
So we have another question in the chat. How do you see William & Mary's role in helping the community with the painful past that a lot of African Americans still feel like William & Mary doesn't do enough to help with? We talked about this a little bit with the construction of Hearth and how you want the space to be a space of Black students to use. Do you see this also as a space for community members to use?
I do, and I think we model that by who we are as a community. I always said this, and I think I've said this to Dr. Barber a couple of times along with my classmates who are also in the room. If any of the founding fathers were to return to William & Mary today, would they see a difference? Would they see a difference in how this community is shaped, how it's supported? And the answer is, for me, I don't think that they would see a huge difference, because we still see where marginalized communities, predominantly Black communities, are still building this community, right? In our facilities management teams. And those who are, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't be, but who are also working in diversity, equity, inclusion spaces where we're having to pay the Black tax for those spaces, because we have to deal with things that are marginalization related, minority related, all those things. And I don't like to say the word minority, but I'm using it in this context for a reason. And so I think when we look at what's moving forward for us, we need to make sure that this university is not just physically representing, but emotionally and internally representing what we are saying this community should be. We should really be thinking about the kinds of people that we are bringing here to hold spaces. And we're not just bringing in marginalized populations just for the sake of bringing them in too, right? Like, yes, we know that traditionally Black women are really holding it down for DEI, but should Black women also be holding it down in spaces of finance, in advancement, athletics? Just what does that look like? Because of course we know we can do all things. So I think, yes, this has the potential to be an amazing space. We just have so much more work to do to make sure that this university is welcoming to that. I mean, we can bring people in, but if we can't retain them, that's a problem, right? And I'll sort of give an example. So I'm working to help revitalize the Black Faculty and Staff Forum, because during the pandemic, the organization basically was non-existent. There was so much turnover. in terms of the folks who were leading the organization. And then not to mention, you know, with our own personal struggles going on this campus, we can't always lead the charge for what's going on in our community when we're struggling with it ourselves. So where's our support? That said, being who I am, I also recognize that a need needs to be filled and we should have this organization accessible to us. And so I'm helping with a group of people who we've been charged as the transition team to rebuild this organization, to reinvigorate and reimagine. So we had our first meeting, which called for us to ask different Black faculty and staff, what exactly do you want? What should this organization look like today? I think back to the tragedies of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and I remember at that moment, like there was no space to go to. And there were so many people that I would talk to on campus saying like, we want to do something, but like, we just wanted to get away from other people on campus, because while that's happening, people are also giving their unsolicited opinions about what's happening. But also some people saying some things that are pretty microaggressive and even racist. And so it needed to be done. So this can definitely be in that realm. And I definitely want us to see us use this space to our advantage. And for those who are interested in this organization, please join our listserv. And you can contact me directly, but it's what we need to do. And I'm hoping that this organization will continue to move forward, and I will give all that I can to support it because we need it.
So you're a millennial in a lot of leadership positions, a lot of various roles around campus. What advice would you give to younger millennials and Gen Z about taking on leadership roles in their professional lives?
First, don't talk yourself out of doing it. Do not talk yourself out of doing it. I think during this pandemic, we showed that we can, because if I may say, if it wasn't for millennials in a lot of these offices, I don't know how remote work would have continued. Because we were doing some of the training where there's not enough IT people in the world who could do the training for some things that were happening. So, that's one space. Two, I think if we're talking about progressing this world in the way that it deserves, it requires millennials to be in the room of those decision making. Great majority of us are definitely over 30 now. And I want to make that clear because some people confuse Gen Z for millennial. We are not the same. It's important that you do have those voices in the room to think about. And then also, not to mention, I think millennials do have some of us have a lower tolerance in terms of things that we think are old and outdated. Some of us are trying to be the bridge builders. And I think you definitely need both of those types in the room as well. And so first and foremost, don't talk yourself out of going for leadership positions, because we're needed at this time more than ever. And I think also when we look at the political landscape, it's well overdue. It's well overdue. So we're talking about people who are committed to DEI or anti-racism, or just trying to build a better world for our children so that we can give them something better than what we've had, then it requires us to do that work too. So definitely continue to keep yourself educated, keep yourself in position to give back, because that's the other part. I heavily believe in mentoring, and I do work with high school students quite a bit, and give them what you can too, because those are our future leaders. I think I'm going to leave it at that. I just definitely encourage it. And I'm a proud millennial. I know some people feel like, oh, millennials are this and millennials are that. The reality is we're all human and we're just trying to figure it out too. And there wasn't a handbook left on how to adult, so here we are.
We have a question and a comment from a first year law student. who thanks you for this talk and your time. And they're learning a lot. How do you think students, staff, and faculty can best collaborate and work together on needed change at William & Mary?
I think first we have to recognize that we are all in here with a common goal, and that's to uplift this university, and that's to make it a better university. That's one. And then two, I think we need to all come from a place of humility to ask questions, to create very innovative and creative solutions about how we do that. And I say that because it's going to look a little different for everybody because everybody wants something different. So when we talk about the mission, vision, and values, right, I think first we have to also look within ourselves of how do we even embody our mission, vision, and values? And if you haven't answered that question for yourself, how are you going to expect others to answer it for you? Or to be able to articulate what it is you are looking to do or want to do for this institution. And then think about all the different solutions that can work and just start working down the list and realizing even when we come to again to that place of achievement that it's still not enough and that we have to keep pushing forward. And I will also say surround yourself by individuals too who don't necessarily think like you. I think sometimes we get in these think pieces and we always want to go to the people who have the same ideas as us. And I think it really is helpful to talk to people who may not have those ideas or to seek out voices that you don't normally hear from. And that's what's going to be needed in terms of us collaborating. I will say one thing I am happy that the university is starting to look at is how we break down these barriers, the barriers that create the silos within our own institution. And so I'm glad that we are really taking the time to think about how do we get on the same sheet of music, whether it's with policies, whether it's with events that we're hosting, and whether it's with just how we communicate. You know, I think for a long time, we recognize a lot of communications were undergraduate centered. And now we're getting to the point where we are seeing where the communications have more, I mean, they're still lengthy, but like they have to be lengthy because we recognize there's so many different populations of students that we're talking to. And also recognizing there's a time for us to be individual and a time for us to be collective, and being okay with that too. So I would love for this law student to come talk to me personally and we can talk about, you know, things more in depth for your perspective. I would love to hear from you. Do not hesitate to schedule an appointment with me or reach out to me. Would definitely love to have that conversation.
Well, we're getting close to 1, so I want to be, you know, keeping in mind that we all have busy schedules, but I want to thank you so much for this great conversation and for taking part in this event. We really appreciate this conversation, and unless you have anything else that you'd like to say.
I will say, you know, the one thing I want to give back to this community is just be authentically you. And don't be afraid to share what that means. I'm still working through that too. I tell people all the time, I'm like, y'all aren't ready for the full REL. Like, I just don't think you're ready all the way. But I'm getting closer. And so I definitely encourage you to be your authentic you, but also know that with that, take whatever responsibility and accountability comes with it as well. And like, I'm not going to play like the whole respectability politics game, but just recognizing sometimes when you do bring your whole you, there are going to be questions because people aren't used to that. And so be ready to have that conversation and what that means. I will also say, if the pandemic has taught us nothing else, keep setting those boundaries and protect your peace by any means necessary. That's it. So I thank you all for your time, and I'm happy to hear from anyone who wants to reach out. I am asnewbie@wm.edu. So please feel free to reach out.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day. Thank you, Marielle.